I, an 18-year-old female, have an older sister who is 31 years old and married with 2 kids, one 8-year-old boy and one 5-year-old girl. Ever since my niece and nephew were young, they were spoiled and would throw tantrums to get what they wanted. My sister, being the oldest in the family, would never say no. On the rare occasion that she did, my niece and nephew would cry and scream until my sister gave in and bought them expensive gifts. A few years ago, my sister got them iPads, and ever since then they have been glued to them. If you took the iPads away or they lost charge, they would throw a fit. My niece and nephew have no regard for anyone's feelings and have reached a stage where they will openly say things like, "You're not my mum, I'm not listening to you," or "I don't need to do what you tell me to." This behaviour annoys my family at times. Don't get me wrong, I love them with all my heart, but the way they speak and behave towards family and friends is rude. My sister doesn't punish them. Instead, she encourages their behaviour, saying they're young and we shouldn't get angry at kids. My nephew has a tendency to pick on his sister, especially when he has a friend over, which leads to my niece crying and seeking comfort. However, she also acts out in retaliation. Whenever they visit our house, they run around creating a mess, yelling and screaming. They refuse to eat the food my parents make if they don't want it, and talk back to my parents without hesitation. My niece has a problem with stealing. If she sees something she likes, she will take it. On one occasion, I found her in my room, going through my drawers and picking out clothes, as well as having a handful of my old stuffed teddies. When I gently explained to her that she couldn't do that, she ran off, and my sister got mad at me for punishing her. Everything came to a boiling point when my niece and nephew were jumping around in my younger sister's room, yelling at her. I walked into the room to ask what was going on, and they looked at me and said, "We don't love you. You aren't our mum." This genuinely hurt me. When I told my sister, she said to let them be and that they didn't mean it. From the corner of my eye, I saw my niece standing there with a grin on her face, and she ran off, leaving me hurt and angry. I don't know what came over me, but I let out all the pent-up frustration and said things that my family had never dared to say before. I finished by telling my sister, "Your kids are behaving like devils, and I recommend you start disciplining them for their actions." I then went to my room where I'm currently writing this. So Reddit, am I the idiot? In the heat of the moment, I didn't think I was, but sitting here now, I'm starting to feel like I am. Update. Hey everyone, I have an update for you. I live in Australia. This morning, my sister came over to talk to me, but instead of having a conversation, she yelled at me for disrespecting her kids. I sat and listened to what felt like hours of screaming. When she finished, she told me to grow up and said that my kids are good kids. Hearing that made me angry, and I honestly told her that her kids don't respect me, the family, or the house. Our family values respect, but she has failed to teach them respect and manners. I shouldn't have to open my door and catch my niece stealing from me. I apologized for the way I referred to the kids, but I reiterated that if I didn't tell her the truth, someone else would. My sister looked at me and said, "You're not a mother, so you can't judge my parenting." It's true that I'm not a mother, but I had to explain to her that even though I'm not a mother, I can't just stand by and watch my niece and nephew grow up to be disrespectful people. If they're willing to be rude and mean towards their own family, what will happen to them in the real world or at school? I can't help but worry about them as their behavior is getting worse. My sister, as well as her husband, need to be held accountable for their actions. I reminded her that if she came over just to yell at me, it shows where her children learned their disrespectful attitude. I suggested to her that she try new tactics, like teaching them that stealing is wrong, setting limits on their screen time, and learning to say no to them. She looked at me with disgust and left. The entire family is on my side in this situation and commended me for saying what they've all been wanting to say. However, I feel like my sister will never listen or change, especially when it comes to her children. Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, not the idiot, spoiled children are the worst, but reading this post without paragraph breaks was pretty rough too. Comment 2, not the idiot, your sister is an AH for not parenting her little brats properly. Now, for the update. After my sister stormed out, things went quiet for a while. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd take some time to reflect on what I'd said, but I guess I was too hopeful. The next few days were tense, to say the least. My sister didn't call or text, and I started to feel guilty for causing a rift in the family. I missed my niece and nephew despite everything. Then, out of the blue, my sister showed up at our house again. This time, she brought the kids. I was surprised, to say the least. She asked if we could talk, and I agreed, hoping we could finally sort things out. We sat down, and she actually apologized for her reaction. She admitted that she'd been struggling with discipline and was at her wit's end. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. We spent the afternoon discussing strategies and boundaries. My sister seemed open to suggestions, and I felt like we were finally making progress. The kids even apologized for their behavior, which was a huge step for them. For a moment, it felt like we were a family again, working together to solve our problems. But as the week went on, old habits die hard. My sister's attempts at discipline were half-hearted at best. The kids quickly realized that her threats were empty, and they went right back to their old ways. It was disheartening to watch. I tried to support my sister, but she brushed off my concerns, saying that she had it under control. Then, the inevitable happened. My nephew got into a fight at school. It was serious enough that my sister had to go in for a meeting with the principal. She was mortified, and I could tell that she was starting to see the consequences of her leniency. But instead of taking it as a wake-up call, she became defensive. She blamed the other child, the school, everyone but herself and her son. The family tried to rally around her to offer support and advice, but she pushed us all away. She said we were ganging up on her, that we didn't understand what it was like to be a parent. The tension was back thicker than ever. My parents were heartbroken watching their daughter and grandchildren spiral out of control. And then, the saddest resolution of all. My sister decided that the best course of action was to cut ties with the family. She said we were toxic, that we were the reason her kids were acting out. She packed up her things and took the kids to stay with a friend. We were all stunned. I never thought it would come to this. I sit here now in my room, the same place where I wrote that first post, and I can't help but feel like I've lost a part of my family. I worry about my niece and nephew, growing up without the love and support of their grandparents, aunts and uncles. I worry about my sister alone and struggling to cope with the challenges of parenting. I keep replaying the past week in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. But deep down, I know that I spoke the truth. It's just a shame that the truth wasn't enough to bring us together. Instead, it tore us apart. Now for the comments. Comment 1. Oh honey, you've stumbled into a real-life episode of Toddlers and Tiaras, the home edition. It's like trying to teach a cat to swim. You can only do so much before you get clawed. You're not the bad guy for wanting to save the Titanic from hitting the iceberg, but sometimes you just gotta let Jack and Rose float on their own door. Comment 2. It's tough when love gets tangled in a web of unruly kiddos and stubborn sibs. Maybe suggest a family meeting with a neutral mediator. Could be a professional or an Uncle Bob everyone respects. It's like bringing in a referee to a food fight. Things might actually get cleaned up. Now for the next story. I'm 17 years old. My sister Cassie, 22 years old, is one of those people who is a bully to everyone and justifies it by saying, "I'm just keeping it real." She clearly knows it's wrong, by the way, because she only does it to family when nobody who could affect her school professional reputation is watching. It's obvious no one in the family likes Cassie's bad attitude, but usually no one says anything because then Cassie gets overly defensive and turns it into a huge fight with yelling, and my family doesn't want to deal with the drama. My family actually celebrated Thanksgiving last week at my grandparents' house, since we're all going to be in different places on the actual day. During dinner, Cassie looked over my cousin Molly's 15 years old shoulder and saw she was reading a webcomic. Then Cassie started talking about how the webcomic is overrated, calling Molly basic and making fun of her for reading it. I was especially irritated because I really like hanging out with Molly, but she and her parents are rarely willing to visit in person because Cassie's always causing issues like this. I told Cassie that Molly's allowed to like what she likes, and there's no reason to be rude when Molly wasn't bothering anyone. Cassie made an excuse like, "Well, I'm just being honest," and I told her that she doesn't have the excuse of just being honest because nobody asked for her opinion in the first place. Cassie got angry and started going off about how you may be too dumb to know, but she has free speech and doesn't need permission to speak, which was literally not the point at all. My mum asked me and Cassie to just drop it, but Cassie kept trying to get the last word in. I got fed up and snapped at Cassie. I told her she bullies everyone and no one says anything because they don't want to put up with the drama, but I'm sick and tired of her being a jerk to everyone, which was all something I've wanted to tell Cassie for a long time. Cue the yelling and waterworks from Cassie. She went on about how no one ever lets me talk, no one listens to her opinion, blah blah blah. She tried using guilt to get people on her side, and the whole night was tense after. When we got home later, my mum told me that I humiliated Cassie and that I am in the wrong. She said she knows Cassie is frustrating, but I know that's just how my sister is and I'm supposed to ignore her. and I gave everyone a headache by provoking her and causing the drama of her crying and yelling at Thanksgiving. It's been a week and Cassie is still in a bad mood. I thought what I did was justified, but it seems like Molly is the only person in my family who thinks I did the right thing. I realise it wasn't the most civil route, but I still feel Cassie brought it on by being a bully in the first place. So I'm asking Reddit, am I the idiot? Now, for a few comments before the update, comment 1. This is classic triangulation. Family systems often center cohesion and agreeableness as the core values, so bad behavior gets normalized for the sake of going along, whereas the person calling it out is labeled disruptive and scapegoated. Your whole family needs therapy. Comment 2. You're not the idiot. She said she knows Cassie is frustrating, but I know that's just how my sister is, and I'm supposed to ignore her. Yeah, okay. So tell your mum reacting this way is just how I am, and Cassie can ignore it. That seems fair to me. Now for the update. A lot has happened since that Thanksgiving dinner. I guess you could say it's been a pretty eventful few days, and I've learned a lot about my family and myself. The day after the big blowout, things were still pretty tense. Cassie was giving me the silent treatment, which to be honest was a bit of a relief. It gave me some time to think about everything that had happened without her constant snarky comments. I spent most of the day in my room, and Molly texted me a few times to check in. She was really supportive and said she was glad someone finally stood up to Cassie. That made me feel a bit better, but I was still worried about the fallout. The next day, my mum sat me down for a talk. She said she'd been thinking about what I said and realised that maybe we'd all been enabling Cassie's behaviour by not confronting her about it. She apologised for making me feel like I was in the wrong for standing up to Cassie and said she was proud of me for being brave enough to speak out. That was a huge relief, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Later that day, Cassie came to my room and actually apologised. She said she didn't realise how her actions were affecting everyone and that she didn't want to be the reason our family was failing apart. I was shocked, to say the least. Cassie and I had never really had a heart-to-heart like that before. We talked for a long time, and she opened up about feeling insecure and using her honesty as a way to feel more in control. It wasn't an excuse for her behaviour, but it helped me understand her a bit better. We decided to call a family meeting to clear the air. Everyone shared how they felt, and it was pretty emotional. Cassie listened and took responsibility for her actions, which was a big step for her. We all agreed that we needed to communicate better and not let things fester. It was a really productive conversation, and I think it brought us closer as a family. The next day, Molly and her parents came over for a surprise visit. They said they'd heard about the family meeting and wanted to give us another chance. We all hung out and had a great time, and it felt like the old days before Cassie's behaviour had driven a wedge between us. It's been 3 days since that meeting, and things have really turned around. Cassie has been making an effort to be kinder and more considerate, and the rest of us are working on not walking on eggshells around her. It's not perfect, and I'm sure there will be more bumps in the road, but it feels like we're finally moving in the right direction. I'm really grateful for Molly's support through all of this. She's been a great cousin, and I'm glad we can hang out without worrying about Cassie causing issues. And I'm proud of my family for being willing to change and grow. It's not easy to confront these kinds of problems, but I think we're all better for it. So yeah, it's been a pretty wild few days, but I'm hopeful for the future. I think we've all learned that it's important to stand up for what's right, even if it's uncomfortable. And that sometimes the people who seem the toughest on the outside are the ones who need the most support. Now, for the comments. Comment 1. Hey, it sounds like you've been dealing with a lot. Cassie's behaviour isn't okay, but it's good that you stood up for Molly. Maybe try having a one-on-one with Cassie in a neutral space to talk things out. Sometimes bullies act out because they're hurting too. Comment 2. You did the right thing, standing up for your cousin. It's tough when family dynamics get messy, but it's important to call out bullying. I'm glad to hear your mum and Cassie are coming around. Keep being that positive force in your family. It's making a difference. Now, for the next story. I lost my dad when I was 6 to a heart attack. He was young but had a bad heart and died in his sleep when he was 29. My mum remarried a couple of years later. She and her husband, my stepdad, met 7 months after my dad's death. They started dating after knowing each other for a few months. Then they got married. I should mention that they met through a grief support group. My mum's husband lost a child to stillbirth, and his relationship fell apart. My mum and her husband wanted me to look at him as another father in my life. I never saw him that way, not even when he and my mum had my half-brothers together. I never hated my mum's husband. I go through a lot of mixed feelings about him. Sometimes I like him because I see he's a good husband to my mum and a good dad to my half-brothers. Sometimes I dislike him for not respecting that. I want to get along but do not want a fatherly relationship with him. I have never loved him. He has never gotten to be someone I consider actually important to me. I think because throughout the negative has always outweighed the positive. What doesn't help is he will often tell me he loves me, but also goes into how he lost his bio daughter, and that makes him love me more. And then he also brings up that losing my bio dad means I need someone else to fill that role. He told me a young child who loses a parent cannot decide they never get a new one. They need to do their best to make the relationship as close to the original one as possible. I have asked him if it isn't enough to just be friendly and on good terms. My mum asked me before why I need to show more loyalty to my dad than to her and her husband, and why I can't let him in enough to be that second dad so everyone else can be happy. She told me she knows I would be happier if I had another person filling the role Dad left behind. She said it doesn't mean he replaces Dad, but it means I also have a dad here, now that I'm in my 20s and I'm engaged to be married. I asked my mom if she would walk me down the aisle at my wedding, and she freaked out and told me I needed to ask my stepdad. She told me that asking her would crush him. Of course, he walks in as she's still being very loud, and when he realized what was going on, he told me it would mean the world to him to fill the father of the bride role and do both parts of walking me down the aisle and performing a father-daughter dance at the wedding. My mum pestered me about it for days afterward. So I asked if we could meet up, and I told her I will give her what she wants, but I need her to understand this is not for me. It's not what I want. It's not making me happy, and it will not change how I feel about her husband, no matter how much she wants it to. But I told her if it's that important, I will do it. She called me manipulative for spewing all that before formally agreeing, and told me I had managed to shoot on my doing a good thing. Am I the idiot? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot. You should walk down the aisle by yourself and get something of your dad's or something that reminds you of him and have it on you somewhere hidden or not. Please do not be a people pleaser. Please celebrate this day you want to. Comment 2. Not the idiot. Also, you could just not have anyone walk you down the aisle. It's pretty old-fashioned, the idea that parents own a woman until they give her to the husband. Now, for the update. So, I went through with it. I let my stepdad walk me down the aisle. It was awkward, to say the least. I could tell he was trying to be all emotional and fatherly, but it just didn't click for me. I felt like I was in some weird play where everyone knew their lines but me. My mum was beaming, though, like she'd won some kind of prize. I guess in her eyes she did. The wedding was a blur, but the reception, that's where things got real. The father-daughter dance was up, and there I was, in the middle of the dance floor with my stepdad. The music started and he was getting teary-eyed. I just couldn't. I mean, I was there physically, but my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking about my dad, the one I lost when I was 6. It felt like I was betraying him in some way, and I just started crying. Not the cute, single-tear kind of crying. No, this was the ugly, can't-catch-your-breath kind. Everyone was staring, and I could hear the whispers. My stepdad, he stopped dancing and just held me. And for the first time, I didn't push him away. I let him comfort me, and it was nice. Not life-changing, but nice. After the dance, we sat down, and he did something he'd never done before. He apologized. He said he was sorry for pushing so hard to be my dad when he should have just been there for me in whatever way I needed. That was a surprise. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. The next day, my mum and I had a long talk. She cried, I cried, and we both said things we'd been holding back for years. She admitted she was wrong for trying to force a relationship between me and her husband. She said she just wanted me to be happy and thought that was the way to do it. I told her I understood, but that I needed her to accept that my feelings were valid too. It was a rough conversation, but it felt like we'd finally broken through some wall that had been between us for years. My husband has been my rock through all of this. He never pushed me to do anything I didn't want to do and just supported me. After the wedding, he told me he was proud of me for handling everything with such grace, even when it was hard. That meant a lot to me. He's been amazing, listening and just being there. I feel like this whole ordeal has brought us even closer, if that's possible. The days after the wedding were a mix of relief and awkwardness. My stepdad was trying to give me space, but you could tell he was unsure of where he stood. I decided to clear the air. I invited him for a coffee, just the two of us. It was probably the most honest conversation we'd ever had. I told him I appreciated his apology and that I was willing to start fresh, but that it would take time for me to see him as more than my mum's husband. He seemed to get it, and we agreed to take things slow. It's been 3 days since that coffee, and things are different. Not magically fixed, but there's a sense of understanding that wasn't there before. My mum has backed off, and I can tell she's trying to respect my boundaries. My stepdad has stopped with the I love yous and the talks about filling my dad's shoes. It's like we're all learning how to be a family in a way that works for us, not just for one person. I'm not saying it's perfect. There are still moments of tension and times when I miss my dad so much it hurts. But there's also this new sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, we can get to a place where the good outweighs the bad. It's going to take work and it's going to take time, but for the first time in a long time I feel like it might be possible. And that's something, right? Now for the comments. Comment 1. Oh honey, navigating the emotional minefield of blended families is tougher than trying to do a Sudoku puzzle with a blindfold on. Not the idiot for feeling your feels, but remember, life's too short to play emotional tug-of-war. Maybe give Step-Pops a chance to do the cha-cha in your heart at his own pace. Comment 2. Did you ever chat with your stepdad about how you cherish your bio-dad's memory? It might help. Not the idiot, but it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole with feelings. Take a breath, have a heart-to-heart, and maybe you'll find a new groove in the family dance. If you liked this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.